Bear cub got stuck inside a cannon. What this baby did was shocking. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll help us to remain in touch with amazing people like you. In a sleepy mountain village nestled between ancient pines and misty valleys, life moved at the gentle pace of changing seasons. The village square featured an old Civil War cannon, a relic from battles long forgotten, now serving as both historical monument and children's climbing frame. On this particular autumn morning, amber light filtered through crimson leaves as shopkeepers swept their doorsteps and farmers brought their produce to market. Emma Winters, barely 13 months old, sat on a quilt spread across her family's front porch. Her mother, Clara, arranged fresh-picked apples into a basket nearby, occasionally glancing at her daughter, who was completely absorbed in stacking wooden blocks only to knock them down with delighted giggles. The cottage stood just off the square, giving Clara a clear view of the morning's activities while she completed her chores. "Look at Mrs. Patterson arguing with the baker again," Clara said to Emma, who paid no attention to the village drama. Instead, the child's attention fixed suddenly on something else, a movement at the edge of the forest that bordered their small community. A small, dark figure emerged from between the trees, sniffing cautiously at the ground. It was a bear cub, no bigger than a large dog, its fur glossy black in the morning light. The mother bear was nowhere to be seen, an unusual and concerning circumstance that went unnoticed by the villagers busy with their morning routines. The cub, likely drawn by the scent of honey from the baker's fresh pastries, padded hesitantly into the open square. Emma watched, transfixed by the creature's careful movements. She dropped her blocks and crawled to the edge of the porch, pressing her face between the wooden railings. Clara, distracted by a neighbor calling out greetings, didn't notice her daughter's sudden interest or the unexpected visitor to their village. The cub sniffed around the base of the cannon, pawing at something. Perhaps crumbs left by children who had eaten their treats near the monument the previous day. Then, with surprising agility, it clambered up onto the cannon's wheel and peered into the barrel's dark opening. A chipmunk, having made a temporary home inside the cannon, darted out suddenly, startling the cub. In a clumsy attempt to back away, the young bear slipped and tumbled headfirst into the cannon's mouth. Its frightened yelps echoed metallically as it slid deeper into the barrel, its struggles only wedging it more firmly inside. Emma's eyes widened. Her small hands gripped the porch rails tighter as she watched the cub's hind legs and tail thrashing at the cannon's opening before disappearing entirely inside. A muffled, whimpering sound emanated from within the metal chamber, a sound that seemed to speak directly to something primal in Emma's young heart. Clara turned back to her daughter, noticing her intense focus. "What are you looking at, sweetie?" she asked, following Emma's gaze to the cannon. The whimpering had stopped momentarily, and nothing seemed amiss in the peaceful square. "Just the old cannon. Yes, it's always been there, long before you were born." But Emma knew something her mother didn't. She babbled urgently, pointing with determination toward the square. Clara smiled at her daughter's apparent fascination with the historical artifact, completely unaware of the small crisis unfolding inside it, or the extraordinary connection that had just formed between her infant daughter and a frightened bear cub trapped in darkness. The cub's panicked whimpering started again, louder this time. Its cries reverberated within the metal cylinder, creating an eerie, hollow sound that carried across the square. A group of teenage boys lounging near the village well perked up at the strange noise, exchanging curious glances before setting down their drinks and sauntering toward the cannon. "Did you hear that?" asked Liam, the tallest of the four boys. his lanky frame casting a long shadow in the morning light. "Sounds like something stuck in there." "Probably just a raccoon or squirrel," replied Darius, pulling a stick from a nearby bush. "Let's check it out." Emma's tiny fingers gripped the porch railing tighter as she watched the boys approach the cannon. Her babbling grew more insistent, almost frantic. Clara finally looked up from her apples, noticing her daughter's distress. "What's gotten into you today?" she asked, setting aside her work and moving to pick Emma up. "You're all worked up about something." The moment Clara lifted Emma, the child twisted in her arms, pointing and making urgent sounds. Clara followed her daughter's gaze just as Darius reached the cannon and began poking his stick into the opening. A heart-wrenching cry echoed from within, clearly not that of any squirrel or raccoon. "There's something big in here," Darius called out, grinning with excitement. The other boys gathered around, taking turns peering into the dark barrel. "Whatever it is, it's stuck good," said Theo, the youngest of the group, his freckled face alight with mischief. "Let's smoke it out." "No," said Liam, suddenly serious. "That sounded like... I think it might be a bear cub." The words sent a ripple of excitement through the small crowd that had begun to gather. A bear cub in their village was unusual enough, but one trapped in their historical canon was unprecedented. Some villagers stepped back in fear, while others pressed closer in curiosity. Clara's husband, Daniel, emerged from their cottage wiping his hands on a cloth. He'd been repairing furniture in his workshop at the back of the house and had missed the commotion until now. "What's going on?" he asked, joining his wife and daughter on the porch. "Something's trapped in the cannon," Clara explained, bouncing Emma gently as the child continued to fuss. "The boys think it might be a bear cub." Daniel's expression darkened with concern. "A cub? That means the mother can't be far." He scanned the forest edge warily. "Everyone needs to back away. Bears are fiercely protective of their young." As if summoned by his words, a low, rumbling growl emanated from the trees. The crowd fell silent, all eyes turning toward the sound. There, at the edge of the forest, stood an adult black bear, her massive form partially hidden by the shadows of the trees. Her small eyes glinted with intelligence and maternal fury as she surveyed the scene, nostrils flaring as she caught her cub's scent. "Nobody move," Daniel whispered, slowly backing toward his front door, gesturing for Clara and Emma to do the same. "Get inside, now." The villagers froze, caught between the instinct to flee and the knowledge that sudden movements might provoke the bear. The teenagers who had been so brave moments before now stood paralyzed with fear, the stick still clutched in Darius's trembling hand. The mother bear took one step into the clearing, then another. Her powerful muscles rippled beneath her thick fur as she moved with surprising grace for such a large creature. The villagers collectively held their breath, but Emma, too young to understand danger, too innocent to feel fear, was fixated on the trapped cub's cries. With surprising strength, she squirmed in her mother's arms, reaching toward the cannon with such determination that Clara nearly dropped her. "Emma, stop!" Clara whispered frantically, tightening her grip on her daughter. The commotion drew the mother bear's attention directly to them. Her head swiveled, eyes locking onto Clara and Emma on the porch. The bear rose slightly on her hind legs, sniffing the air, trying to assess whether these humans posed a threat to her child. In that moment, something extraordinary happened. Emma ceased struggling and instead locked eyes with the mother bear. The child's innocent blue gaze met the bear's dark, knowing eyes in a connection so profound that the air itself seemed to still. For 3 heartbeats, human infant and mother bear regarded each other across the square. 2 mothers' children, one free but afraid, one trapped but crying for help. Then Emma did something that made every villager gasp. She pointed directly at the cannon and made a sound that, though wordless, conveyed meaning with perfect clarity, as if to say, "Your baby is there." The mother bear dropped to all fours and padded cautiously into the square, her attention now divided between the humans and the cannon where her cub's cries had grown fainter. The teenagers scrambled back, giving the massive animal a wide berth. Villagers pressed themselves against buildings or ducked behind market stalls. "Don't run," Daniel called out in a hushed but carrying voice. "Just move slowly away from the cannon. Give her space to reach her cub." Most heeded his advice, creating a wide circle around the bear and the cannon. But at that moment, old Mr. Finch, hard of hearing and unaware of the drama unfolding, emerged from the general store with a bell jingling loudly above the door. Startled by the sudden noise, the mother bear reared up with a roar that echoed off the surrounding buildings. Panic erupted. Villagers scattered in all directions, some running into buildings, others fleeing toward the forest on the opposite side of the square. The bear, confused and frightened by the sudden movements, swatted at the air with her massive paws, her roars growing more intense. In the chaos, Clara lost her grip on Emma. The child, impossibly fast on her hands and knees, crawled through the porch railing slats before her mother could react. "Emma!" Clara screamed, lunging forward only to be held back by Daniel's strong arms. "You can't go out there," he said, his voice tight with fear. "The bear will kill you both." But Emma, oblivious to the danger, crawled determinedly toward the cannon, toward the mother bear, toward the frightened cub whose cries had touched something deep in her young soul. The entire village watched in horror as the tiny human child made her way across the square, directly into the path of the agitated bear. Time seemed to slow. The mother bear turned, noticing the small movement on the ground. Her eyes fixed on the approaching infant, and she lowered herself to all fours again, head low, in a posture that could precede either a protective charge or simple curiosity. Clara's scream died in her throat. Daniel's grip on her tightened. The village held its collective breath as the bear and the baby girl drew nearer to each other with each passing second. Then, something remarkable happened that would be recounted in the village for generations to come. Emma stopped just short of the bear, sat back on her diaper-padded bottom, and simply pointed at the cannon. She made a series of soft cooing sounds, not unlike the whimpers coming from inside the metal barrel. The bear halted her approach, massive head tilting to one side as if listening intently to the baby's unintelligible communication. Behind a rain barrel at the edge of the square, Nora Ashford, the village veterinarian, watched with professional fascination overriding her fear. In her 15 years of working with animals, she'd never witnessed anything like this interaction. The bear's body language had shifted from threatening to curious. "Don't anybody move," she whispered to those closest to her. "The bear isn't showing aggression anymore." Indeed, the mother bear's attention had shifted from Emma to the cannon. She approached it cautiously, her nose working overtime, catching her cub's scent from the metal prison. She circled the cannon once, twice, pawing at it gently, then more forcefully as her cub's cries grew excited at her presence. Emma watched this with intense concentration, her small features set in determination. Then, to everyone's astonishment, she began crawling again, not away from danger, but directly to the front of the cannon. "Dear God," whispered Reverend Matthews from the steps of his church across the square. "Someone stop her." But no one dared move. The bear was now just feet away from the cannon's opening and approaching the same spot where Emma was headed. Mother bear and human child reached the cannon's mouth almost simultaneously. The bear growled softly, a warning. Emma, unintimidated, patted the cannon's opening with her tiny palm, making encouraging noises as if soothing the trapped cub. Then she did something so innocent, yet so breathtaking that several villagers later claimed divine intervention. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a half-eaten cookie, saved from breakfast. With exquisite gentleness, she placed it at the very edge of the cannon's opening, then scooted back slightly, as if giving the bear permission to approach. The mother bear sniffed suspiciously at the offering, then at Emma. The child smiled, a pure, radiant expression of trust that seemed to transcend the boundaries between species. The bear's aggressive posture softened further. Inside the cannon, the cub had gone quiet, perhaps sensing its mother's presence. The bear turned her attention back to the problem at hand, pawing more deliberately at the cannon's opening, trying to reach her child. "She can't get to it," Nora observed quietly. "The cub must be wedged too far inside." Emma, as if understanding this dilemma, crawled around to the back end of the cannon where the opening was narrower. The bear followed, watching the small human with what could only be described as cautious tolerance. Emma patted the rear of the cannon and made an excited sound. "I think," Daniel whispered, his arms still protectively around Clara on their porch, "I think she's trying to show the bear that the cub could be pushed out from this end." "That's impossible," Clara said, tears streaming down her face. "She's just a baby. She can't possibly understand." Yet Emma's actions suggested otherwise. She continued patting the back of the cannon, then crawled around to the front again, making the same motion as if demonstrating how something could move through the barrel. The mother bear observed this curious behavior, her intelligent eyes tracking Emma's movements. Then, surprisingly, she moved to the rear of the cannon and began to paw at it more decisively. "Remarkable," Nora breathed. "It's as if she understands." A new sound emerged from within the cannon. Not a cry of fear, but a scrambling noise, as if the cub was making renewed efforts to free itself. The mother bear continued her gentle but persistent pawing at the rear opening, occasionally circling to the front to check for her cub's progress. Emma remained near the front of the cannon, occasionally reaching her small hand toward the opening, then quickly withdrawing it as if playing a game of peekaboo with the trapped cub. Her fearlessness in the face of wild animals and her intuitive understanding of the situation confounded every adult watching. Minutes passed in this strange tableau, baby and bear working in unexpected harmony to free the trapped cub. The villagers remained frozen, afraid that any intervention might shatter this delicate balance and provoke the bear's protective rage. Then came a sound of scraping metal, followed by a high-pitched yelp. The cub's hind legs appeared at the cannon's mouth, kicking frantically. Emma scooted back, giving space as more of the cub emerged, its rump, its back, and finally its head, blinking confusedly in the sudden sunlight. The cub tumbled out onto the cobblestones, disoriented but apparently unharmed. It shook itself vigorously, sending dust and debris flying from its fur. Emma clapped her hands in delight, giggling at the sight. The mother bear approached her offspring, sniffing it thoroughly to ensure it was uninjured. The cub nuzzled against her, seeking reassurance after its frightening ordeal. For a moment, the bear family seemed to forget the humans surrounding them, caught in their private reunion. Then the mother bear turned and fixed her gaze once more on Emma, who sat just a few feet away, still clapping excitedly. The massive creature took one step toward the child, then another. Clara's heart stopped. Daniel tensed, ready to rush to his daughter despite the futility of such an action against a creature that could kill with a single swipe. Nora gripped the rain barrel so hard her knuckles turned white. The bear lowered her head until her face was level with Emma's. The child, fearless to the last, reached out a tiny hand. For one breathless moment, the bear's snout and the baby's palm were inches apart. Then the bear did something utterly unexpected. She exhaled softly, ruffling Emma's fine hair with her warm breath. A gesture almost like a blessing. The child giggled at the sensation. The bear stepped back, nudged her cub toward the forest edge, and with a last inscrutable look at the human baby who had helped save her child, lumbered away into the protective shadows of the trees. Only when the bears had completely disappeared from sight did the spell of silence break. Clara tore free from Daniel's grasp and ran to her daughter, scooping her up and clutching her to her chest with desperate relief. Villagers emerged from their hiding places, their voices rising in an astonished chorus of exclamations and questions. "Did you see that? The baby wasn't afraid at all. How did she know what to do? It's a miracle they weren't both killed." Daniel reached his wife and child, enfolding them both in his strong arms. "Are you all right?" he asked, checking Emma for any sign of injury. But Emma was perfectly fine, more than fine. She was beaming with satisfaction, still pointing toward the forest where the bears had disappeared, babbling excitedly as if trying to tell her parents all about her adventure. Nora approached the family. Her professional composure returned now that the danger had passed. "I've never seen anything like it," she said, her voice filled with wonder. It was as if they were communicating somehow, as if your daughter understood exactly what needed to be done. "But that's impossible," Clara said, kissing Emma's forehead repeatedly, still trembling from the ordeal. "She's not even talking in words yet. How could she possibly understand about the cannon or the cub being stuck?" Reverend Matthews joined them, his normally composed face alight with emotion. "Perhaps," he said gently, "some kinds of understanding run deeper than words. Perhaps innocence sees what experience blinds us to." The teenagers who had first discovered the trapped cub hung back, shamefaced at their initial impulse to torment rather than help the frightened animal. Liam stepped forward, addressing Daniel directly. "Sir, your daughter, that was the bravest thing I've ever seen. We should have tried to help right away, instead of making things worse." Daniel nodded, acknowledging the boy's contrition. "Fear and cruelty often go hand in hand," he said. "Maybe we could all learn something from Emma about approaching the unknown with curiosity rather than fear." As the excitement gradually subsided and villagers dispersed to their interrupted routines, each carried with them the image of the tiny girl and the massive bear, locked in a moment of impossible understanding. The story spread quickly, growing with each telling, though the reality needed no embellishment to be extraordinary. That evening, as Clara rocked Emma to sleep, she gazed down at her daughter's peaceful face with new eyes. "Who are you, really?" she whispered. "What do you see that the rest of us don't?" Emma's eyes fluttered open briefly. She smiled up at her mother, then turned her head toward the window that faced the forest. In the gathering darkness, Clara could have sworn she heard a distant bear's call, not threatening, but somehow conversational, as if saying goodnight to the unusual friend it had made that day. Daniel appeared in the nursery doorway, watching his wife and daughter with tender appreciation. "Do you think she'll remember any of this when she's older?" he asked softly. Clara shook her head. "Probably not consciously. But something tells me this day has changed her forever. Changed all of us, really." As Emma drifted into dreams filled with forest creatures and unspoken friendships, the village settled into an evening of animated discussions about the day's events. No one noticed the small shadow that briefly darkened the winter's window, a bear cub, standing on its hind legs, peering curiously into the home of the strange, small creature, who had somehow known exactly how to help when help was needed most. Morning broke over the village with extraordinary brilliance, as if nature itself acknowledged something remarkable had occurred. Daniel emerged from the cottage first, stretching in the doorway before stepping onto the porch to check the weather. He stopped abruptly, his coffee mug halfway to his lips. There, arranged in a perfect semicircle at the bottom of their porch steps, lay a collection of forest offerings: pine cones, a honeycomb still dripping with wild honey, bright autumn berries, and most surprising of all, a perfect white wildflower that usually only bloomed deep in the forest. Daniel stared, baffled by the arrangement that was clearly intentional, not random. "Clara," he called softly over his shoulder, not wanting to wake Emma if she was still sleeping. "Come look at this." Clara appeared beside him moments later, her hair still tousled from sleep. "What is it?" she asked, then followed his gaze downward. "Oh," she breathed, one hand rising to her throat in surprise. "Who would?" Her question died as she noticed the distinctive paw prints in the soft earth around the offerings, not large enough to be the mother bear's, but too big for most forest creatures. "The cub," Daniel said, voicing what they were both thinking. "It came back." Clara shook her head in disbelief. "That's impossible. Bears don't bring gifts. They don't say thank you." But the evidence before them suggested otherwise. Daniel knelt to examine the offerings more closely. "Look at these prints," he said, pointing to where they led away from the house. "It came from the forest, made a complete circle around our cottage, left these things, and then headed back the same way." As they puzzled over this new mystery, Nora Ashford approached from the direction of her clinic, carrying her medical bag. She'd mentioned yesterday that she wanted to check on Emma this morning, just to be sure the child hadn't suffered any delayed shock from her close encounter. "Good morning," she called cheerfully, then noticed their focused attention on the porch steps. "What are you looking at?" "We're not entirely sure," Clara admitted, stepping aside to let the veterinarian see. Nora's professional demeanor gave way to open astonishment. "Are those gifts?" She knelt beside the arrangement, careful not to disturb it. Her trained eye immediately recognized the significance of the paw prints. "The cub came back," she stated, not asking. "It appears so," Daniel confirmed. "But why? How would it even know where we live?" "Bears have an exceptional sense of smell," Nora explained. "But this," she gestured at the arranged offerings. "This shows deliberate intention, intelligence, purpose." She looked up at them, her scientific mind clearly struggling with implications that went beyond her training. "I've worked with wildlife for 15 years. I've never seen anything like this." From inside the cottage came the sound of Emma awakening, her morning babbles drifting through the open window. Clara turned to go to her, but froze when her daughter's random sound suddenly formed a pattern that, while not quite words, was unmistakably an attempt to imitate a bear's call. The three adults exchanged shocked glances. "That's uncanny," Nora whispered. Daniel cleared his throat. "She's probably just processing yesterday's events. Children absorb everything." But his explanation felt inadequate in the face of the gifts on their doorstep and his daughter's eerie mimicry. Clara hurried inside to check on Emma, leaving Daniel and Nora to contemplate the mysterious offerings. When Clara entered the nursery, she found Emma standing in her crib, facing the window that overlooked the forest. The child was utterly still, focused on something outside with an intensity unusual for one so young. Clara approached cautiously and followed her daughter's gaze. There, at the very edge of the tree line, barely visible in the morning shadows, stood the mother bear. She wasn't moving toward the village or showing any aggression, just watching, as if standing guard. Beside her, partially hidden by a bush, was the cub. "Daniel," Clara called, her voice tight with renewed fear. "The bears are back." Daniel and Nora rushed into the nursery. Emma, hearing the commotion, turned to them with a bright smile, then pointed excitedly toward the forest. "Bah!" she exclaimed, her first attempt at a real word. "Bah!" She's trying to say bear, Clara realized, gathering Emma into her arms protectively. Nora moved to the window, studying the bears with her professional eye. "They're keeping their distance," she observed. "Not threatening, just observing." She turned to Clara. "May I hold her? I want to test something." Reluctantly, Clara passed Emma to the veterinarian, who brought the child back to the window. Emma immediately brightened, bouncing excitedly in Nora's arms and reaching toward the glass. "Bah, bah," she repeated enthusiastically. As if in response, the cub rose on its hind legs, paws against a tree trunk, in a posture that mirrored Emma's reaching. The mother bear remained still watching. "This is unprecedented," Nora murmured, her scientific curiosity overriding her caution. "It's as if they formed some kind of bond." "That's ridiculous," Daniel said, though his voice lacked conviction. "They're wild animals. They don't form bonds with humans, especially not with babies." "Perhaps we don't give them enough credit for intelligence," Nora suggested. "Or perhaps there's something special about Emma." She glanced at Clara. "Has she always had this affinity for animals?" Clara considered the question. "She's always been drawn to our neighbor's dog, and the barn cats seem to follow her when we visit my sister's farm. But nothing like this." She gestured helplessly toward the window, where the tableau of baby and bears continued their silent communication. "I'd like to document this," Nora said suddenly. "With your permission, of course. This kind of interspecies connection is unheard of, especially with predators like bears." Daniel frowned. "I don't want my daughter becoming some kind of scientific curiosity. If word got out, we'd have researchers and sensation seekers disrupting our lives." "I understand completely," Nora assured him. "This would be private documentation only, for scientific purposes, not publicity. The relationship between your daughter and these bears could teach us so much about animal cognition and communication." Before Daniel could respond, a commotion erupted outside. Through the window, they saw several villagers pointing toward the forest edge, having spotted the bears. Someone was running toward the hunting shop, where firearms were sold. "They're going to shoot them," Clara realized with sudden horror. "They think the bears are threatening the village again." Daniel cursed under his breath and rushed from the room. They heard the front door slam as he ran to intercept the growing crowd. Emma began to fuss in Nora's arms, sensing the tension. The bears at the forest edge grew alert, the mother moving protectively in front of her cub. "This could turn ugly fast," Nora said grimly. "If they feel threatened, their instinct will be to either flee or attack. Either way, that connection your daughter established could be lost forever." Clara took Emma back, bouncing her gently to soothe her. Through the window she could see Daniel in the square, his arms raised as he addressed the gathering villagers. Though they couldn't hear his words, his gestures suggested he was urging calm. Meanwhile, the crowd had grown. Old Mr. Finch had emerged from his shop with his ancient hunting rifle. The teenagers from yesterday were there too, though they hung back, their previous day's lesson still fresh in their minds. "This isn't going to end well," Clara murmured, holding Emma tighter. The baby continued to fuss, her earlier joy replaced by distress. Nora made a quick decision. "Give her to me," she said firmly. "I might be able to defuse this." "What are you going to do?" Clara asked, reluctant to release her child. "Something unorthodox," Nora admitted. but I think your daughter has a better chance of preventing violence than all the adults in this village combined." Clara hesitated, maternal instinct warring with the evidence of her daughter's inexplicable connection with the bears. Finally, she handed Emma over. "Be careful with her, please." Nora nodded solemnly and carried Emma downstairs and out the front door, carefully stepping over the arrangement of forest gifts still on the porch. As they emerged, all eyes in the square turned toward them. Daniel broke off his argument with Mr. Finch, alarm spreading across his features as he saw Nora carrying his daughter toward the gathered crowd. "What are you doing?" he demanded, pushing through the villagers to intercept them. "Preventing a tragedy," Nora replied quietly. "These bears aren't threatening anyone. They came back because of Emma. I think they're trying to understand what happened yesterday, just as we are." "That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard," Mr. Finch scoffed, brandishing his rifle. "Bears don't think like that. They're dangerous predators that need to be driven away from human settlements." Emma, still in Nora's arms, turned toward the old man's voice. Her little face screwed up with determination, and she pointed firmly toward the forest, then back at the village, then made a pushing motion with both hands as if to say, "Stay apart." The simple gesture, coming from one so young, created a momentary silence. "She understands more than you think," Nora said into the quiet. "Yesterday, she showed an intuitive grasp of the situation that none of us adults had. She helped save that cub without fear or prejudice." She nodded toward the porch of the Winters cottage. "This morning, the cub brought offerings to their doorstep, a gesture of thanks that defies everything we think we know about wild animal behavior." The villagers murmured among themselves, some skeptical, others curious. Mr. Finch lowered his rifle slightly, though his weathered face remained suspicious. "I believe," Nora continued, growing more confident, "that we're witnessing something extraordinary, a bridge of understanding between species that could teach us all something valuable, but only if we choose observation over fear, curiosity over violence." Daniel, seeing the crowd's hesitation, seized the moment. "The bears haven't threatened anyone since they retrieved their cub. They're keeping their distance, just watching. Maybe we should return the courtesy." Reverend Matthew stepped forward from the crowd. "Perhaps there's wisdom in this approach. Throughout Scripture there are moments when the natural order is suspended to teach humanity a lesson in compassion." He smiled at Emma, who had calmed in Nora's arms. "Sometimes the greatest insights come from the most unexpected sources." The tension in the square gradually dissipated, though Mr. Finch muttered darkly about sentimental nonsense as he reluctantly lowered his rifle completely. The crowd's mood shifted from fear to curiosity as they turned to observe the bears at the forest edge. The mother bear, sensing the change in human intent, relaxed her defensive posture slightly. The cub peeked out from behind her, its dark eyes fixed on Emma, as if recognizing her even at this distance. Clara joined her husband, taking his hand. "What happens now?" she asked softly. "I don't know," Daniel admitted. "But I think Nora's right. There's something happening here that goes beyond our understanding." As if to confirm his words, Emma suddenly pointed to the ground, then made grabbing motions with her tiny hands. Nora, puzzled but willing to follow the child's lead, knelt down so Emma could reach the earth. The baby grabbed a handful of soil, then reached toward the forest, releasing the dirt through her fingers. "What is she doing?" Daniel asked, bewildered. Clara watched her daughter intently. I think she's trying to invite them closer, showing them it's safe." Incredibly, the mother bear seemed to understand the gesture. She took a cautious step out of the forest shadows, then another, the cub following close behind her. The villagers gasped collectively but held their ground, their curiosity now stronger than their fear. The bears stopped halfway between the forest and the village, maintaining a respectful distance but clearly making a gesture of their own, meeting the humans part way. Emma squirmed in Nora's arms, clearly wanting to be put down. The veterinarian hesitated, looking to Clara and Daniel for guidance. "I can't authorize that," Daniel said firmly. "It's too dangerous." But Clara, watching her daughter's determined face, felt a strange certainty growing within her. "She knew what to do yesterday when none of us did," she reminded her husband. "What if she knows now, too?" "They're wild animals, Clara," Daniel insisted. "No matter what strange connection they seem to have, they're still unpredictable. I won't risk our daughter's life on a hunch." While the adults debated, no one noticed Mr. Finch slowly raising his rifle again, his aged hands trembling slightly as he took aim at the mother bear. The old man's fear overrode his judgment. In his mind, he was protecting the village from an inevitable attack. It was Emma who saw him. Her happy babbling ceased abruptly, replaced by a sharp cry of alarm. She pointed frantically at Mr. Finch, drawing everyone's attention to the old man and his weapon. "Finch, no!" Daniel shouted, lunging toward him, but it was too late. The rifle's crack split the morning air like thunder. Time seemed to slow. The mother bear reared up in surprise and pain as the bullet grazed her shoulder. The cub darted behind her in terror. Villagers scattered, screaming. In the chaos, Nora tightened her grip on Emma, turning to shield the child with her body. The mother bear, wounded but not seriously injured, roared her fury and fear. For one terrible moment, it seemed she might charge, fulfilling Mr. Finch's prophecy through his own actions. Instead, something remarkable happened. Emma broke free from Nora's protective embrace, slipping through her arms with surprising strength and agility. Before anyone could catch her, she was crawling rapidly across the square toward the wounded bear, her tiny form impossibly vulnerable on the open ground. "Emma!" Clara screamed, breaking into a run after her daughter. Daniel was faster, sprinting desperately to intercept the child before she reached the potentially lethal danger ahead. But Emma moved with purpose, stopping halfway to the bears. There, in the middle of the square, the baby sat up and began to cry, not in fear, but in a specific pattern of sounds, an eerie approximation of a bear cub's distress call. The wounded mother bear, poised between fight and flight, hesitated at the sound. Her massive head swiveled toward Emma, nostrils flaring as she processed this strange development. Daniel reached Emma and scooped her up, backing away rapidly with his precious cargo. But the damage, or perhaps the miracle, was already done. The mother bear lowered herself to all fours, her aggressive posture melting away despite her injury. The cub peeked out from behind her, making soft answering sounds to Emma's cries. The entire village held its breath, caught in this impossible moment of communication between species. Mr. Finch's rifle hung forgotten at his side, the old man's face slack with astonishment. Clara reached her husband and child, embracing them both fiercely. Emma continued to make her strange calling sounds, reaching over her father's protective shoulder toward the bears. "This isn't possible," Daniel whispered, holding Emma securely against his chest. "How does she know how to make those sounds?" "I don't think she knows," Clara replied, watching her daughter with wonder. "I think she feels." The mother bear took a tentative step forward, then another, her wound seemingly forgotten in her fascination with the human child. The villagers watched in silent amazement as the massive creature approached to within 20 feet of the Winters family, close enough that they could see the intelligence in her dark eyes, the curiosity that seemed to override her natural caution around humans. The cub, emboldened by its mother's confidence, scampered forward to sniff at a clump of wildflowers, then looked up at Emma with what could only be described as recognition. "Don't move," Nora advised softly, having joined the family. "Let them set the boundaries." For several breathless minutes, humans and bears regarded each other across a gap that seemed both physical and metaphysical. Two worlds meeting in an unprecedented moment of peaceful acknowledgement. Emma had stopped making bear sounds and was now simply watching, her small face alight with something that looked remarkably like joy. Finally, the mother bear made a soft huffing sound. The cub immediately returned to her side, and with a last inscrutable look at Emma, the bears turned and walked deliberately back to the forest, unhurried and dignified despite the mother's injury. Only when they had disappeared completely into the trees did the spell break. The square erupted in excited conversation, villagers gesturing and exclaiming over what they had witnessed. Mr. Finch was led away by Reverend Matthews, the old man's face troubled as he grappled with what his fear had nearly caused. Nora examined Emma quickly, confirming that the child was physically unharmed despite her daring crawl across the square. "She's fine," she assured Clara and Daniel. "More than fine, actually. She seems exhilarated." And indeed, Emma was beaming, patting her father's face as if reassuring him that everything was all right. When he finally set her down on the porch steps, she immediately crawled to the collection of forest gifts, picking up the white flower and offering it to her mother with a gurgle of delight. "What does all this mean?" Clara asked Nora as she accepted the flower from her daughter's hand. "Why Emma? Why these bears?" Nora shook her head, her scientific mind clearly overwhelmed by the implications of what they had witnessed. "I don't have answers," she admitted. "This goes beyond my understanding of animal behavior. But I think we're being given an opportunity here to learn something profound about communication, about the connections between all living things." Daniel sat heavily on the porch steps, the adrenaline of the morning's events finally catching up with him. "I just want to keep my family safe," he said wearily. "How do I do that when my daughter seems determined to befriend wild predators?" "I'm not sure we can stop what's happening here," Nora replied thoughtfully. "But perhaps we can channel it, study it, learn from it. Under controlled conditions, of course." Clara cradled the white flower, its petals impossibly pristine. "Do you think they'll come back?" she asked, looking toward the forest. As if in answer, a distant bear call echoed from the trees, not threatening, but conversational. Emma, playing with the pine cones from the bear's gift collection, looked up at the sound and smiled. The seasons turned, summer heat giving way to autumn's blaze, then winter's quiet blanket of snow. Throughout these changes, the extraordinary relationship between Emma and the bears evolved in ways that transformed not just the Winters family but the entire village. After much deliberation, Daniel and Clara had agreed to Nora's proposal for a careful study of the unprecedented bond. Word spread despite their efforts at discretion, bringing a university researcher who specialized in animal cognition to observe the interactions. Dr. Eliza Montgomery arrived skeptical but departed 3 months later with enough material for what would become a groundbreaking paper on interspecies communication and emotional intelligence in bears. The bears established a pattern of visiting the forest edge every third morning, always keeping a respectful distance from the village, but clearly watching for Emma. Clara began bringing her daughter to a small clearing halfway between their home and the forest, where they would sit on a blanket while the bears observed from the tree line. Over time, the mother bear, whom they'd named Sage for her evident wisdom, grew comfortable enough to venture into the clearing, though never without carefully scanning for threats first. Emma's development accelerated in startling ways. She began speaking in full sentences months before most children her age, her vocabulary rich with nature words. More remarkably, she continued to produce accurate imitations of bear vocalizations, creating a rudimentary language bridge that Sage and her cub, now named Cypher for his playful curiosity, seemed to understand. By midwinter, when Emma was 18 months old, Nora had documented over 30 distinct vocalizations that the child used consistently with specific meanings, and which the bears responded to appropriately. The discovery sent ripples through the scientific community, challenging long-held assumptions about language, cognition, and the barriers between humans and wildlife. "She's not just mimicking them," Nora explained to a spellbound audience at the village hall one snowy evening. "She's created a shared communication system. When she makes the low huffing sound, Sage knows it means approach slowly." The 3 short barks always signal danger nearby. It's rudimentary but consistent, and it's completely unprecedented in scientific literature. Not everyone embraced this development. Mr. Finch remained wary, though the shame of his impulsive shooting had tempered his vocal opposition. A small faction of villagers worried about safety and unwanted attention from outsiders drawn by rumors of the bear whisperer child. But the majority had come to see Emma's gift as something precious, a window into another world that had always existed alongside their own, but which they'd never truly seen before. Daniel built a sturdy observation platform at the edge of their property, allowing Emma to safely watch for her forest friends even in the depths of winter. Clara began keeping a detailed journal of her daughter's interactions, noting subtle changes in behavior and communication patterns that even the scientists sometimes missed. The simple family had become, quite accidentally, pioneers in a new frontier of understanding. Spring arrived with fresh wonders. Sage appeared at the forest edge with not just Cypher, but 2 new cubs from her winter denning. The tiny bears tumbled and played under their mother's watchful eye, while Emma, now steady on her feet, clapped her hands in delight from her observation platform. "She's showing Emma her family," Clara realized, recording the moment in her journal. "She's proud." What happened next would be debated, analyzed, and recounted for years to come. One mild April morning, as Emma and Clara sat in their usual spot in the clearing, Sage approached with unusual determination. Cypher and the 2 new cubs followed closely, their playfulness subdued as if sensing the importance of the moment. The mother bear stopped just a few feet from Emma and Clara, close enough that they could feel her warm breath. Clara tensed, years of ingrained caution warring with the trust they'd built over months of peaceful interaction. Emma, however, showed no fear. She rose to her feet and stepped forward, stopping when her mother's hand gently caught her sleeve. "It's okay, Mama," the child said with simple confidence. "Sage wants to show us something." The bear made a soft grunting sound, then turned and walked a few paces toward the forest before looking back expectantly. The message was unmistakable. "Follow me." "We can't," Clara said automatically, tightening her grip on Emma's hand. "It's not safe." Emma looked up at her mother with eyes far older than her years. "She wouldn't hurt us," she said with perfect certainty. "She's my friend." From the observation platform, Daniel watched through binoculars, his heart racing as he recognized the silent invitation. He grabbed the walkie-talkie. "Clara, don't." But his warning came too late. His wife, perhaps influenced by months of witnessing the impossible, perhaps simply trusting her daughter's instincts over her own fears, nodded slowly. "We won't go far," she said into her own walkie-talkie, "and we'll turn back at the first sign of trouble." Daniel's protest crackled through the device, but Clara had already made her decision. With Emma's small hand in hers, she took the first tentative steps toward the forest, following the bear family who led the way with measured pace. frequently turning to ensure their human companions were still following. At the forest edge, Clara hesitated again. This was the boundary they'd never crossed, the dividing line between the human world and the wild one. Emma tugged at her hand impatiently. "Come on, Mama," she urged. "It's important." They entered the forest. Dappled sunlight filtered through new spring leaves, creating shifting patterns on the forest floor. The bears led them along a winding game trail, moving deeper into territory that few villagers ever ventured into. Clara measured their steps, ready to retreat at any moment, but her daughter showed only excitement, occasionally exchanging soft vocalizations with Cypher, who trotted alongside her like an old friend. After 15 minutes of walking, they reached a small, secluded clearing. In its center stood a massive old oak tree, its trunk so wide it would take 3 adults linking hands to encircle it. And there, at its base, was a sight that made Clara gasp. A crude circle of stones had been arranged, and within it lay offerings similar to those that had appeared on their doorstep all those months ago. Pine cones, berries, unique stones, and vibrant spring flowers. But this time, there were also manufactured items: a child's red mitten, a tarnished silver spoon, a faded blue ribbon, and most surprisingly a weathered photograph in a rusted frame. Sage padded to the collection and sat beside it, her intelligent eyes fixed on Clara with unmistakable purpose. "What is this place?" Clara whispered, almost afraid to disturb the profound silence of the clearing. Emma approached the circle without hesitation, kneeling beside the bear to examine the treasures. "It's their special place," she said, running her fingers over the smooth stones. "They bring pretty things here." Clara knelt beside her daughter, curiosity overcoming caution. She picked up the photograph, wiping away decades of grime to reveal a sepia image of a smiling young woman in early 1900s clothing, cradling what appeared to be a bear cub in her arms. "Oh my God," she breathed, recognition dawning. The woman wore a locket identical to one that had been passed down through generations in the village, now belonging to Mrs. Patterson at the bakery. "This is Eliza Patterson, the founder's daughter. The village history says she disappeared in the forest as a young woman. They searched for months but never found her." Emma nodded as if this information merely confirmed what she already knew. "She was like me," she said simply. She understood them. Sage made a soft sound, her massive paw gently turning over a flat stone near the photograph, revealing a tarnished silver locket, the twin of the one still treasured in the village. Clara picked it up with trembling hands, opening the delicate clasp to find a tiny portrait inside, matching the woman in the photograph. Understanding crashed over her in an overwhelming wave. "They didn't harm her," she whispered. "They befriended her, just like they've befriended Emma. And when she died, they kept her treasures," Emma finished, "to remember her." The implications were staggering. Not only had these bears, or their ancestors, formed a bond with a human more than a century ago, but they had maintained a memorial, passed down knowledge of humans through generations, and deliberately sought to re-establish that connection through Emma. "This changes everything we thought we knew," Clara said, her voice hushed with awe. "They remember, they honor, they mourn." As if confirming her realization, Sage lowered her massive head in what could only be described as a gesture of reverence toward the collection of treasures. Cypher and the cubs sat quietly, unusually still, as if understanding the solemnity of the moment. Emma placed her small hand on the bear's broad forehead in a gesture of comfort. "It's okay," she said softly. "I understand now. You've been waiting for someone who could see you, really see you." Clara's walkie-talkie crackled to life, Daniel's worried voice breaking the spell. "Clara? Emma? Are you all right? You've been gone too long. I'm coming after you." Clara raised the device with shaking hands. "We're fine," she assured her husband. "Better than fine. Daniel, you need to bring Nora and Reverend Matthews, and Mrs. Patterson. There's something here they all need to see." "What is it?" Daniel demanded. "What did you find?" Clara looked at her daughter, sitting peacefully between two predators that the world had always told them to fear. Her small hand still resting gently on Sage's massive head. "The truth," she said simply. "We found the truth." Within hours, a small group from the village had gathered in the forest clearing, their expressions moving from fear to wonder as they absorbed the significance of the bear's memorial. Mrs. Patterson wept openly when she recognized her grandmother's locket and photograph, family heirloom she had believed lost forever. "The stories about Grandmother Eliza," she said through her tears. "The family always claimed she spoke of befriending creatures in the forest, but everyone assumed they were just fairy tales she told children. No one believed her." Reverend Matthews knelt beside the stone circle, his theological certainties visibly realigning as he contemplated what this meant about the souls and hearts of creatures long considered mere animals. "Perhaps," he said quietly, "we've been blind to the many forms that grace takes in this world." Nora was almost speechless, her scientific mind racing with the implications. "This isn't just interspecies communication," she said finally. "This is culture, tradition, memory that spans generations." She turned to Emma, who was showing Cypher how to stack small stones. And somehow, this child bridged a gap we never knew could be crossed. In the weeks that followed, the forest clearing became a site of careful, respectful study. The village council voted unanimously to designate the surrounding forest as a protected sanctuary, ensuring that Sage and her family would never face the threat of hunters or habitat destruction. Scientists came from around the world, but access was strictly controlled, with Emma acting as an unlikely but effective ambassador between the human and bear communities. The bears continued their visits to the edge of the village, no longer regarded with fear, but with respect and wonder. Children were taught from an early age to understand and honor these wild neighbors, creating a generation that would grow up seeing the natural world not as something to conquer, but as something to communicate with. Emma's gift continued to flourish. By her third birthday, she had developed a vocabulary of over 50 distinct bear vocalizations, and had begun to detect subtle differences in their meanings based on context and body language. Researchers documented how she could distinguish between Sage's warning about a storm approaching versus her alert about a strange bear in the territory, sounds that were nearly identical to human ears but carried crucially different information. On a golden autumn day, much like the one when their extraordinary journey began, the Winters family gathered on their porch to witness another milestone. Emma, now a confident toddler full of language and insight, waited expectantly at the forest edge with Nora beside her taking notes. This was the day they'd planned for the formal introduction of the newest member of their unusual extended family. Daniel stood with his arm around Clara, who cradled their newborn son, just 6 weeks old. They had named him Rowan, after the mountain ash trees that formed a natural border between village and forest. Neither fully wild nor fully tame, but a harmonious boundary between worlds. Sage emerged from the trees first, her powerful form now familiar and welcome to the watching villagers. Behind her came Cypher, nearly grown now, and the 2 younger cubs who tumbled playfully in their mother's wake. But it was the 5th bear that drew gasps from the assembled humans. An enormous male bear, larger than Sage by half, moved with deliberate dignity beside her. This was Thunder, Sage's mate, who had remained elusive during the first year of interactions, watching from deep forest shadows but never approaching. His presence now, walking openly toward the humans, represented a new level of trust. Emma bounced excitedly, calling out a greeting in her bear voice that made Thunder pause, his head tilting as he evaluated this small human who spoke his language. After a moment's consideration, he responded with a low rumble that vibrated the air between them. "He says hello," Emma translated for the benefit of the watching villagers. "He's been waiting to meet Rowan." Clara stepped forward cautiously, the baby secure in her arms. Daniel moved with her, protective but trusting his daughter's judgment. They stopped at a respectful distance from the bear family, close enough for scents to be exchanged on the gentle breeze, but not so near as to cause alarm on either side. Sage approached slowly, her movements deliberate and non-threatening. She rose slightly on her hind legs, just enough to catch the scent of the newborn, then settled back with a soft sound that Emma had taught them meant contentment. "She says he smells like sunshine," Emma announced with complete confidence, making the adults smile at the poetic translation. Thunder remained where he was, massive and watchful, but his posture was relaxed, accepting. The cubs, curious about the tiny human, moved closer until Sage rumbled a gentle warning that needed no translation: "Look, but don't touch." They obeyed immediately, sitting on their haunches to observe the strange, hairless cub that their human friend seemed so excited about. It was a perfect tableau: two families, different species but bound by mutual respect and understanding, sharing the introduction of new life. Cameras clicked softly as Nora and Dr. Montgomery documented the historic moment, but none of the participants, human or bear, paid them any mind. This was something deeper than science, more profound than study. This was connection in its purest form. As the sun began to lower toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the meeting ground, Emma did something unexpected. She stepped forward and placed a small object on the ground between the two families, a simple wooden carving of a bear that Daniel had made for her. Then she backed away, returning to her mother's side. After a moment's hesitation, Cypher approached the offering. He sniffed it carefully, then picked it up gently between his teeth and carried it back to where Sage and Thunder waited. The message was clear to everyone watching. A gift exchanged, a bond acknowledged, a promise made between species to remember and honor each other. That evening, as twilight painted the sky in shades of lavender and gold, Clara rocked Rowan to sleep while watching Emma arrange her collection of pine cones and stones on the windowsill, treasures from her forest friends that she valued more than any store-bought toy. "Do you think he'll understand them too?" Clara asked softly, nodding toward the sleeping baby. Emma considered the question with characteristic thoughtfulness. "Maybe," she said finally, "but even if he doesn't talk to them like I do, he'll know they're our friends." She looked up at her mother with eyes that somehow managed to be both childlike and ancient. That's the most important part, isn't it? Knowing that someone is different doesn't mean you should be afraid of them. Clara gazed at her extraordinary daughter, this bridge builder between worlds, and felt a profound gratitude for the chain of unlikely events that had begun with a frightened bear cub trapped in an old cannon. "Yes," she agreed, kissing Emma's forehead, "that's the most important part of all." Outside, as darkness settled over the village, a chorus of bear calls echoed from the forest. Not threatening, but conversational. Through the open window, the sound of Emma's perfect response floated into the night air, a promise continued, a connection maintained, a reminder that in a world full of barriers and boundaries, understanding could bloom in the most unexpected places. Behind the Winters cottage, the old cannon still stood in the village square, but it had been transformed. No longer a relic of human conflict, it had become a living monument, its metal surface now entwined with flowering vines, its barrel home to nesting birds rather than implements of destruction. Children left small offerings at its base, pine cones, pretty stones, wildflowers, mimicking the bear's memorial tradition in their own way. And if visitors to the village found it strange to see bears and humans coexisting in peaceful proximity, to hear a young child produce perfect bear vocalizations, to witness two species traditionally divided by fear finding common ground instead, well, that was part of the village's new identity. Boundaries are meant to be understood, not feared, read the new sign at the village entrance, bearing a simple image of a bear paw print alongside a human handprint, not quite touching but perfectly aligned. In the forest clearing where Eliza Patterson's treasures had been kept safe for generations, a new memorial gradually took shape beside the old one. Contem.